So as Terry mentioned, we're here to share with you some insights about pitching, which is probably one of the most overdone and underperformed exercises that so many students and entrepreneurs do. And so what I wanted to do is share with you some thoughts about how to think about presenting your pitch, give you some specifics of the way that Y Prizes sort of set things up for you. And also share with you, and it's actually based on some of the things that we're doing, a common pitch template concept that we're developing to use in all competitions and things throughout Penn, on which a lot of this is based. So that's kind of the game plan. I also have access to a couple of Y Prize winners that I continue to work with those teams. And so I'm happy to go through those and share some elements that I think are particularly strong and ones that aren't. And I think importantly, if you want to go ahead and just put your participant list up and put your chat up. And if you have any questions, just go ahead and type them in. I'll keep my eyes on that and keep my eyes on the participant list in case anybody has any raise hands or anything that you want to ask. So that's the game plan for today. So let me go ahead and get started here. All right, so I'm not going to ask you what it is because it's a little bit harder to be participative via Zoom. But I think if you were to read through this, you'd see that it's the storyline for a movie that many, if not most of you have seen, if not heard of, which is the Finding Nemo storyline. And the reason I bring this up is storytelling is the single most important thing for pitching and just communicating in general. And we show you this particular one for two reasons. One of which is that Pixar is probably one of the best known companies for just being incredibly effective at storytelling. And the list of characters and stories that they've told through their movies is really just a phenomenal list. And this isn't even all of it. It's just a nice graphic of it. But I also show you that because it was based on a blog post that Emma Coates, who was one of the Pixar story artists, wrote about. And she basically said that every Pixar story could be reduced to this common storyline. And what it does is it gives you a really good structure for thinking about things. Now, none of you should ever start your venture pitch with once upon a time. But the framework that this provides, I think, is really critical for thinking about it. So I thought this was so cool when I read this in a book by Dan Pink called To Sell as Human. And I immediately adopted it in my class. So in our engineering entrepreneurship classes, we have a venture development class and everybody's expected to create a venture and they start with descriptions. So this was a submission that I had for an assignment that I said, provide a brief description of your business. And as you can see, it's very tech focused. We teach in the engineering school. But what I did is I took this Pixar storyline and I said, I now want you to retell your story using this structure and really think about it. And we talked a lot about the importance of what you need to communicate and the structure of stories. But what I want you to see is the transformation. This was the team description that they submitted before we did this exercise. And then we did the exercise and this is what it turned out. So you just take a moment and kind of read through this. Now, some really clear things happened in the before and the after. And I think it's what happened and the way that they were able to communicate that is why storytelling is so effective and why you need to strive to tell your story in your pitches. So clearly we went from a very technology centric, it's an engineering school. That doesn't mean that you should be focused on technology because you really do need to tell the story. In this case, we also shifted from being focused on the technology to being focused on the customer and the experience and the impact that it was going to have. We moved from talking in a very process-centric point of view to being very much storytelling, actually using the structure that Pixar provided for us. And the other really important thing that I'll emphasize in another way is the movement away from jargon to common language that anybody can relate to. And this becomes really important. One of the reasons that we teach entrepreneurship in the School of Engineering is to help engineers understand the business context and the communications for effectively migrating technology out of the lab into the marketplace. And moving away from jargon is critically important. If you get into technical due diligence with an investor or a customer, different issue. But that's usually not what people are pitching for. And the last thing is just that shift away from technology to being something that has an impact. So that's the way that stories need to, and your venture needs to think about what it is to tell a story. So there are three things that I have found the best pitches always have in common. And by the way, pitches come in very many different formats and media. Sometimes you'll be doing an in-person presentation with PowerPoint slides. Sometimes you're just going to be standing up, giving an elevator pitch. Sometimes you're going to be giving a detailed presentation for due diligence that could take hours. Regardless of the length of time, the medium, the format, there are three things that all good pitches or presentations have in common. The first one is the story. Good stories set the stage, they introduce a conflict, and they reach a resolution. In business, it can look very many different ways and words and different types of storytelling about it. But at some point, it's about this group of people, target market, has this type of problem that causes them pain or money, costs them money, and the problem's this big and this pervasive. We have something that solves it, right? So this is kind of introducing the solution, the big turn, if you will. And ultimately, most pitches or presentations are persuasive in nature. You're trying to convince somebody to do something. And so maybe you're convincing the Y Prize and the Mac Institute to award you the prize. Maybe you're trying to convince an investor to invest in you, a customer to buy. Regardless, asking for it and asking for it as a natural conclusion is what's important. So three common things. The first one is tell a story. The second one is you have to adapt your content to the medium and the format and the time that you have. But ultimately, your content is going to answer 7 key questions. And those questions are who, what, when, where, why, how, and how much. Obviously, how much is an economic question, but the who and the why become really critical. The what needs to be very simply and very clearly communicated in terms of what your product is. And we'll talk more about this. But if you're doing an elevator pitch, maybe you have 7 to 10 seconds to describe your business, you may not get to a lot of the detail of where, when, how, and how much. You absolutely need to say who it's for, what it is, why they care in 7 to 10 seconds. If you have 2 minutes, if you have 15 minutes, if you have an hour and a half, then you're going to dive into much greater levels of detail, but you're still going to be addressing the same questions. And I think that's a really important aspect. So tell a simple story, answer the 7 questions, and assume that your audience knows nothing. And this is really important. This is not just, I'm talking about microfluidics, and if you don't understand microfluidics, you're not going to understand my business. This is also something that we see really commonly with entrepreneurs, where they'll make an analogy and they'll say, we're the Uber of this, or we're the Airbnb of that. And one of the problems with analogies is your idea of what you intended them to compare you to, it may be very different from the way that they think about it. So if you wanted them to think of Uber as a rideshare company, and they're thinking of it as logistics or transportation, then your analogy is already assumed that they think in one way, and it's wrong. So you cannot assume that your audience knows anything. If you've got a term and you're not sure if they understand it, define the term. It doesn't take that long. So those are the 3 critical things. Tell the story, answer the questions, and assume that your audience knows nothing. Now, for Y Prize, for this initial round, the website is pretty clear, and there are 2 things that you want to take a look at. One of which is the website, which talks about the slides that they're asking for, and I'm going to go through those. But then there's also a link at the bottom of that same web page, which is a link to the Y Prize rubric. And I just created a bit.ly for you here if you want to write it down. It is case sensitive. So it's Y Prize rubric 2021 with a capital Y, P, and R. And the reason you want to take a look at that is you want to make sure that your story is both addressing the topics that they have, and it's reflective of the way that they're going to be rating you or grading you, which is what's reflected in the rubric. So that's really important. It also brings up another really critical issue, which is every single competition, every prize, every investor, they've got a list of topics that they want you to cover. We do in the Penn common pitch deck template that I'll share with you. But the important thing that I want you to think about is these are topics that you're supposed to address and integrate into a single story. So don't go ahead and treat the topics as slide titles and leave it at that. it's really important that you approach it fundamentally differently. But let's go ahead and take a look at the areas that they're talking about. So it says a 5-slide deck. You're going to have a title slide. It's going to be one. We'll talk about what's in a good title slide. But first thing I want to talk about is the opportunity. Now, in this case, the opportunity is expanded. It's not only, well, how big is the possible market, but it's also defining the application of the technology that you're seeing for this, which I think is a really important aspect. So it brings up this idea of product market fit, which is the fundamental value proposition that your application of the technology, whichever one you choose, has for whatever group of customers or people that you see for it. You'd like to try to size it just to make sure that it's significant enough opportunity to address, which I think is a really important aspect of it. So that's the first thing. The second one is, okay, what is the actual application of the technology? And how is it that that's going to give you a sustainable or competitive advantage versus what people are using now, which I think is really important. Now, this is where you don't need to rehash the Penn intellectual property because that's the foundation. You do want to understand what is the product. Now, I kind of have issues, and Terry, you can contradict me, that's fine. But they say, we want you to talk about the technology. You should never be talking about the technology because people don't buy technologies. They buy experiences and products. So you want to talk about the product. And the product is, how is it that you're going to incorporate the technology into something, and it could be a product and a service offering that is going to be valuable to somebody and change their life, right? So the technology in the OncoChip example was a microfluidics chip, lab on a chip. Nobody's going to buy a microfluidics lab on a chip. They're going to buy a diagnostic to have early detection for cancer, right? That's the application, that's the product. Actually, that's not even the product. The product is, okay, how do you actually deliver it and package it? Does it have an accompanying machine or service offering? Does it need to be done by a lab? So you really have to kind of give the entire concept of what the product offering is and how you're going to use the technology to make a difference. The third one is the team. And I think this is really important because the team needs to be balanced and needs to have skill sets and experience, hopefully, that contribute to why is it that this team can take this technology, integrate it into this product, and ultimately serve this market need or opportunity. So that's a lot more than just here are our faces, here are our titles, and here's a bunch of logos of the companies we work for. I always think about it as why you, why now is an important aspect. So team is more than just who are the faces that you're associating with it, with the venture that you're pitching. And the last one is an execution plan, which is kind of hard and kind of unfair because it's a 5-slide deck. So there's an awful lot that you have to cover. So keep it simple and keep it high level. There's a technology that lives in a lab somewhere, and you're going to be incorporating into a product. So there's the commercialization and the development that's required, and then you have to bring it to market to ultimately capture value. So big milestones to give a sense of what needs to happen and over what period of time does it need to happen, which I think is a really important aspect. So those are the topics and those are the areas. Now it's up to you, but I would recommend to you that you not have a title slide followed by 4 slides, one of which has the title opportunity. The other one has the title technology. The third one has team, and the fourth one has execution plan. You want to knit them together and integrate them into a compelling story. So that becomes an important way. The best way that we found, and we've been doing this for a while, the best way that we found to integrate those topics into a story is to actually use storyboarding. And storyboarding is quite simply taking a collection of panels. Think of a comic strip that have little windows, and each one has a title. It's going to have content, right? In a comic strip, you're going to have pictures and balloons and what have you. In our world, each slide will have a title. But in the storyboard, what's going to be effective for you is the title is not just market opportunity. The title should be, what's the key piece of information that you want us to take away from this slide that sets up the next slide and that precedes the next slide as well? And that's the key that you want to do. So don't, I would advise you, do what most people do, which is they pull up whatever, whether it's Beautiful AI, PowerPoint, Keynote, you pull up whatever slide template for a venture pitch is there, and you start filling out each individual slide. Actually sit down with a piece of paper or whiteboard, whatever you can do. You can use the whiteboard in Zoom if you want to do Zoom meetings, and literally just create the titles. And the titles give, this is the takeaway from that slide. And then maybe you've got a description of what you'll eventually put on it. But if you focus on this storyboard, you're going to see that you can actually put together a story of your venture. Now, a couple of things as we just look at the storyboard that I put together here, which is obviously very generic, but it tells the story of the Y Prize pitch, if you will. A couple of things that you should have on your title slide. First is, this is where you're setting the stage for who you are and what you're about, right? This is the thing that may appear first, and maybe you're not going to be talking to this slide yet. It's just going to be up there once people look at it. Maybe you're just submitting a pitch deck, and so you want to make sure that they know what's the name, what's the reason that we're here, who is this from? So make sure that you've got the basic elements on that title slide. By the way, a sort of jump to the end for a moment. Don't have a final slide that just says thanks, questions. At the very least, just repeat your title slide. And most importantly, make sure we have contact information at the end of that. So let's kind of walk through each of these, because what you see is a brief storyboard that actually addresses each of the 4 topics that we talked about before. So the opportunity or problem presents and sets the stage for your venture, right? And maybe you're going to have some graphics and some data that talks about the problem that people have and how many people suffer from it, or the dollars that are reflected here. That's going to differ depending on what you're presenting. But you need to set the stage and provide the context for it. Then you're going to say, here's my solution to it, right? Here's the product or service offering that's going to solve that problem that I described in the previous slide or slides. And then you're going to get into the area which is, but this is how we incorporate the Penn technology to deliver that solution. And so you're tying those pieces together. Now, the next jump is a little bit harder, right? The next jump is, okay, well, I've got the opportunity. This is the product I'm developing. This is the role that the Penn technology plays. And now you want to think about, okay, let me introduce you to the people that will take this technology, incorporate it into this product, and bring it to market, right? And so that's one way to transition into that team presentation. But keep in mind that most importantly, we're talking about, these are not just a bunch of faces. These are the people that will make the things happen that need to develop this product, commercialize the technology, bring it to the marketplace. And these people are going to do these things over the next weeks, months, years. And that's however you choose to communicate. It could be a timeline, it could be a roadmap, it could be just a set of milestones. However you want to communicate it, the important element is, these are the people that can make this happen. And here's the this that they're going to make happen. And then at the very last, don't just have the, this is the end of my presentation, big black screen, end of slideshow. Actually have an ending, right? That sort of brings us back and says why this matters. So I'm going to pause there and see if people have any questions before I go on and maybe show you a couple of samples of some things. Terry, did you have any questions? Do you want to call me out on anything?
No, not at all. I feel like, I mean, I think, I don't have to tell you, I think all your content is fantastic. And I think it's kind of easy to say some of the things you state like seem so obvious about, not doing this or that on certain slides, but it's not. I mean, we see these things every year of certain slides that you're like, wow, that's probably not the best use of that. So this is just good reminders all the way around. But before you continue, I wanted, because I know Dean can't stay,
Cool. Yeah.
I just wanted to quickly introduce Dean Miller. He is our head judge who has graciously joined us. I'm going to put him on the spot. We didn't talk about this in advance, but Dean, did you want to say anything and introduce yourself to the group and just about what the judges might be looking for?
Yeah, happy to. Good evening, everybody. And Jeff, as always, tremendous job on really breaking down the process And Terry, thanks so much for bringing me back. Yeah, this is a really competitive process. And I think it has just brought out the best in the teams of the past. And really honored just to be involved in it for sure. You know, when we sit down to judge submissions, it is really hard to do. But I will tell you that there are things that absolutely separate teams, and Jeff is hitting on many of those aspects. Terry, I think once again, teams will be submitting videos as well, correct?
Correct. Our submission guidelines haven't changed. The rules are up to a 5-minute video pitch, and I think it's 5 slides.
Mm-hmm.
So it's the same. So it's quick. I mean, it's not a lot of info. So
yeah, and I'll tell you what, it you know, for those of you on the phone that have put together your team, if you've got somebody that's really good at video editing, it really helps because conveying information in a really succinct fashion is hard to do. And I'll share you this one story. I have a very good friend who is a very gifted biomedical engineer who cannot speak. He has ALS. He's brilliant. And he actually formed a company, and as a result had to record his pitch by literally typing out the pitch and then having it you know, computer generated. He gave the most exquisite 5-minute pitch because he eliminated all of the ands, ums, uhs, and got right down to the succinct message. I'm not suggesting you do that, but I use that as an example because it absolutely can be done. The other thing I'll just share is that you have a base level of technologies, and sometimes it can be really easy to say, hey, I'll just kind of put something together at the end. But I can tell you that the winning teams have done a lot of upfront diligence on their idea to craft their market, even talk to potential partners or customers, or at least develop a plan on how they're going to go about doing that. So really spend, in addition to the crafting that Jeff is focusing on, that upfront work to really you know, hone what your product is, what your go-to-market strategy is. We don't expect you to have all the answers, believe me, but I can tell you that yeah, the winning teams do work hard to at least start that process. Last thing I'll mention, then I'll go back on mute and let Jeff take over. Yeah, this is a competition university-wide, which, as you know, attracts undergrads, attracts grads, etc. And sometimes you could kind of walk into a room. If we were sitting, we'd be walking into Steinberg Dietrich or something like that, and you'd look around and see, maybe if you're an undergrad, there are a lot of experienced engineering grad students. We have seen some tremendous undergrad results. I've witnessed undergrad teams blow away really experienced grad teams. Now, I don't say that to grad teams saying that you have a disadvantage. I'm only sharing that because undergrads, you might times show up and think you're at a disadvantage. This program, I will tell you, is not the case. So that's it for me, unless, Jeff, you have any questions.
No, in fact, the first pitch I'm going to show you is from an undergrad team that still is probably, you know, one of the greatest presenters of all time. But it's really important. And I think Dane's point is well taken. I mean, these days, you have the tools available to you to make these incredible videos, but it's no substitution for really understanding your content and communicating your concepts. So I think that's absolutely critical. So, you know, and I also will just say that sort of you can tell in a video, you can tell if somebody gets up and presents, you can tell somebody that both really connects to the story that they're telling versus somebody that's just kind of reading whatever script they generated. So just be genuine in the video. I think that'll help a lot. Cool. So this one, let me just see if the links work on this because I want to make sure. All right. So are you seeing a picture of the Sing Center?
yes.
Right now? Good. Okay. So I'm not going to do this justice, but I'm going to just show you pieces of a couple of pitches. The first one I'm going to show you was the 2017 winner of the Y Prize, company is still in business. They've raised seed funding now. They just closed their seed funding. They're continuing to develop this product, and it's changed a lot because any business that doesn't change means you're probably not working on it. But one of the couple of things that they did that I just thought were really, really good, their opening, right? So this was the first thing that they showed you. And the next thing that they said, and I can't do it justice the way Rui Jing did, but she said, glaucoma affects 80 million people in the world. And for those with glaucoma, this is what they see. And, you know, all of a sudden, you didn't need glaucoma, you didn't need to know anybody with glaucoma, but all of a sudden you had an idea of what was going on. And so that opening story of these people have this problem came to life in one slide, basically, or one animation, if you will. So then she went on to say, okay, well, this is the problem. It's open angle glaucoma. And I just do want to just make sure that you're seeing the slides as I'm changing them. They're still VisiPlate slides that you see. Okay, good. Because when you get into multiple screens of Zoom, I see one thing, you see different things, and it's a little funky. So it talks about how it damages. Notice we haven't said anything about, well, what's their product and what's the technology and all of that, because they're still sort of setting the stage for why this is such a big deal. Now, I also do want to offer the caveat here that the presentations I'm showing you were the final presentations. So instead of the 5-slide, 3-minute video or whatever, however long the video is, this was the finalist presentation. But you can see that it's a matter of, well, I can't have as many slides and I can't tell as in depth. I just have to cover, as Dean said, the most succinct, critical elements of the story. So the bottom line is, you know, it affects a lot of people in the US, and the numbers have changed since they do it. And the great thing about this one is, great thing, terrible thing, 100% of people that get glaucoma go blind, 100%. They can take drugs, they can get surgeries, they can do all sorts of other things, but eventually they will go blind. And so you want to talk about setting up sort of a dramatic issue, that's what they're doing. Size of the market. And again, this was the final, so they had a lot more going on with that one. But just a really effective job of opening it, setting the stage, and then talking about what they were doing. Now I'll show you one specific way. They actually had to deal with the complexity of explaining the buildup of intraocular pressure and the whole concept of what leads to the buildup of the pressure, because they had to set up the nature of their device. But when it comes to it, and I think this is an important one, and so I want to show you a couple of different examples in terms of how they solved this. But what they're basically doing is, let me see if I can get there. Wait, went over the one, there we go. This is what I'm looking at. So this is the technology that they were using. And the technology basically was developed by Igor Bargatin, who's one of our engineering faculty. And it's a nanoscale material that has several properties. None of those properties have anything to do with optic nerves and eyes. So this is just, I think, a really good example of how you can take a pen technology and apply it in a very different way. And I don't even think that Igor had thought about this or what have you. But what they did is they focused on the properties of the patented technology. In this case, nanoscale, really, really thin. It had these channels, right? Channels allow fluid to flow. And it was so thin that it didn't cause a lot of the problems that other surgical devices cause, which I think is important. And it was flexible, right? So nanoscale, flexible, can be handled, all these benefits. But it wasn't until they brought it together and said, we're going to create a medical device implant. And here's what the implant does, right? In terms of, it is more effective at alleviating the intraocular pressure, and it's much less invasive than the surgical procedures now. So it's kind of this trade-off. So this was the way that they chose to demonstrate the competitive positioning, as it were. So that was one way that VisiPlate did it. Any questions on that? I thought I'd just show a couple of different ones. You can either put it in the chat or you can raise your hand, or since nobody but me is talking. Yeah, and Phil, totally agree. But actually, it's amazing how long they used that same opening for, because it was so impactful, that I think it was really important. So let me show you another one, which is very different. I can get there. Now, this one, I think I may have to do a little bit of change of format. So let me know when you see do you see a PDF now that says Metal Light? Okay, cool. So Metal Light was last year's winner. Completely different technology, as is this year's. But they won last year, and the technology that they were doing was based on, basically it allowed the generation of electricity using air and metal, okay? Now, what they were doing was very different. So they didn't have as clear or as impactful an opening as you saw with Avisi, but they really got down to the issue right away. And the issue right away was the fact that there's an enormous number of people that do not have access to the electrical grid, not just in Texas anymore, but this is in a much broader context. So they were talking about those people that are considered off the grid, and the majority of those people are in Africa. And I think what's fascinating is, even though there is an acceleration of electrification, if you will, in Africa, it still is predominantly, or in a segment, off the grid. So that was sort of setting up their issue with what's going on. Now, that was one part of the problem. The second part of the problem is light, or the use of lamps, was kerosene based. That was predominantly what was going on in that part of the world. So a two-part problem, which I think was really effectively delivered in this presentation. Now, one thing that I'll also point out that I'm here, which I thought was kind of interesting, is you'll notice in the upper left corner of their slide, there's a little word that says problem, which I was like, you guys don't need to put that in there, right? You're telling us what the problem is. So don't say this is the problem, but it's okay. But I think what's great is the title of their slide very clearly, very simply says what the problem is, right? Today's use of kerosene lamps creates real health problems, okay? Now, if that's the title and that's my takeaway, I would immediately expect to see content on the slide that tells me the nature and the size or scope of that problem. So first of all, 99% of the households use kerosene lamps, okay? So that means it's not just the 3 people that are using kerosene, it's 99% of the market. And look at this, right? So more deaths are caused by indoor air pollution from kerosene lamps than anything else. Impactful problem statement, which I think is really important. And if we can reduce it, we can have tremendous health benefits. So great example of a title delivering the takeaway, and the content. In this case, it's bullet points. Sometimes you can use graphics, but this is a well-crafted slide. The title is brief, concise, and states the takeaway, and the content directly supports what's going on. Whether the content is text or graphics doesn't really matter. And then it goes on to talk more about the problem. So a very different approach, very different technology, completely different solution, which we haven't gotten to yet. But I think a really important quantification of the problem. The other thing that I want to point out here that both of these ventures did is they quantified the problem. They didn't just say, kerosene lamps is a lot of pollution. They gave us numbers that sometimes it shocked us, but it gave us a real sense of, yeah, this is a problem. And they cited the sources that they have. So other tips for you, I think, to keep in mind that what's going on. Now, a couple of things that I like about this slide and a couple of things I do to improve it. I like the fact that we said, hey, I'm now about to shift my attention away from the problem to our solution and how we're leveraging the technology. So I like that. Here's a slide that's kind of shifting gears for a little bit. What I'd offer that they would do to improve this slide, you should never be asking questions in your presentations. You should be answering them, okay? So I think a much more effective title would be not how can we use PEN's technology, but this is the fundamental or the core way that we're using the technology, and then go into detail on it. So this is something I just see, and partly it's a pet peeve, but partly you should also understand that if you're asking questions, either verbally or on your slides, it actually can serve to lower our confidence in your knowledge of what you're doing. Now, sometimes you might use a rhetorical question for starting something out, which is, well, how many of you have ever had this experience? The problem is sometimes the way that you deliver that might leave uncertainty in the audience of whether or not you actually want them to answer it, or why don't you just deliver the information? So I would offer to you, be direct, be concise, use action verbs, deliver the information, as opposed to asking the question, then answering it. So I think that's a really important part. Now, that being said, they got right to the point, right? They basically said, this is how we are creating light from scrap metal. So I think that this title should have been the previous slide's title, right? We are creating light from scrap metal. There's one other way that I would strengthen this title. Anybody want to tell me? Anybody want to type in the chat or just unmute and say, just in the title, what's one tiny, tiny change that can really make a difference in this title? Anybody want to guess? I'll give you a hint. Replace the first two words. The name of the solution in the title, right? Metal Light creates light from scrap metal, right? Never miss an opportunity to reinforce your company's name, your team's name, your project name, your brand. This is particularly important if you are actually trying to go out and create a venture. Our solution. The odds are we've heard so many of these pitches, we forgot who ours is. So always reinforce your name. Now, good news is they do have Metal Light in the top right corner, right? So that's a good part. Their logo is right up here. But why not have it front and center in the title so that you're really saying it's not just us that's changing it, it's this is who we are, which I think is important. The great thing about this is it balances some specific technical information, but more importantly on the left, it's got the benefits information. So I really like the way that they did that. And then some more discussion about how they're doing it, how they're positioning it. This is another example of a slide that I always say a good sanity check of a slide is there any question when you look at a slide that it belongs to you and only you? So the minute you say our position, technology suppliers, distributors, financiers, end users, NGOs, and private retailers, the only word here that gives some indication of what we're talking about is NGL, right? Everything else could belong to almost any industry that uses technology, distributors, financiers, and end users, which is almost any industry. So again, never leave an opportunity out to use your name, and never leave the opportunity out to be very specific about who the players are and what they're doing and what's going on. Okay, so I think those were the main points that I wanted to make. Some different ways to look at go-to-market strategy, timelines. I think if I went back to Visiplate really quickly, you'd see that they did it more as significant milestones based on development. And obviously there they had to deal with human trials. And oh, this is another good thing that I think both of these companies did, but I'm showing it here now. Notice the quote. What does the quote do for you? And this is, we hereby confirm that we're interested in working with you for manufacturing. So what does that do for the audience? And by the way, the commitment, we don't know if they were just friends with Jonas or whatever, but a quote from somebody boosts your credibility. And that's really important. Now, there are all sorts of questions I'd want to know about that person. What are they committing to? What do they need? What are they doing? But just the fact that it means they've gone out, as Dean said, they've gone out and they've talked to people. And that's going to strengthen your case. So that's another good one. We have the team needed to launch. So what I love about this is they're really focused on what are the skills that we need to launch. Okay. And then I look down and I say, oh, I need engineering, I need strategy and ops, and I need partnerships. Cool, right? Those are three generic categories. I can read and see what the expertise and backgrounds and credentials are for everybody. Again, the only change I'd say is Metal Light has the team needed to launch. And so I think it's, it's a good way, but pretty pictures, always humanize it. If you ever have a name on a slide without a picture, maybe you've got a logo like this one does, but ideally having pictures of people always humanizes what's going on. And the last thing I'll say is every slide, every ending of a presentation on your video, we always say, treat it as a marketing activity. And every marketing activity has an objective, a target audience, a call to action, and a way to measure that call to action. A presentation is no different. In this case, your objective is, we're out here to win the prize. The audience that you've got is the panel of judges or the reviewers that are going to be reviewing the content. The call to action is freaking ask for the prize. Tell them why you deserve it. And then the way you'll measure it is see what the results are. So let me go back to my core thing and just show you a couple of other things, and then we can either wrap or open it up for questions. So just a couple of tips to help you improve your presentations. And if anybody's interested, I will provide Terry with the slides, and I think she'll post them along with the recording. So I know some people just want to get copies of the slides, and that's fine. So open with something compelling. You saw Veezy's opening, which I think was good. You saw Metal Light's opening, which is good. Reinforcing why we're here. Telling the story is really important. Making it as real as you can. By the way, one of the best ways to make something real is if you've experienced it, then tell the story about yourself. If you know somebody that's experienced and you know them well and you feel like you can connect, you can tell their story. But even just telling a specific story of the sufferers of glaucoma, whatever you can do to make it real. Putting in customer quotes or partner quotes is another way to make it real. Just being genuine and authentic, I think, goes a long way. Text and graphics, I think what was great about both of these companies' presentations is you didn't see enormous density of stuff or huge volumes of text that required a lot of reading for us. They really balanced text and graphics and provided visual interest, but delivered the takeaways, which I think is really important. We've talked about the importance of specificity and making sure that your title delivers the takeaway. And as much as possible in a video, you're going to have visuals and you're going to have talking points. You should not be reading your visuals, and you should not have visuals that everybody's trying to figure out, how does this relate to what they're talking about? So it's a balancing act. The visuals are reinforcing what you're talking about, and they can stand on their own alone to a certain extent. Again, you just never want to have somebody look at a slide and say, huh, what's that they're talking about, or what are they going to do? And Dean said this, but I think it's really important in 5 slides and a short period of time. Key messages, that's all you can do. Most people can't remember more than 4 or 5 things. I'd say 3 is probably the max. So focus on the 3 key points of your presentation and reflect those in your storyboard, which is really important. I said whenever a person's involved, make sure you've got pictures, which is really important. And just make sure you're asking for the prize, because at the end of the day, that's what you're here for. This is the most compelling use of this technology to take advantage of a great opportunity, whatever that is. And it was funny, when I was talking to Ray Jing, one thing that she said, because I always try to review these with people who have gone through it, is she said one of the things that she felt they didn't do a good enough job of, but she said most of the teams that she had seen that did a really good job of this, is just making sure that we know why it's your team that is able to make all this happen. And I think that's important. And as Dean said, that's not dependent on your grade or program that you're involved with. It's about complementary skills and balancing that. So I mentioned that we've got this Penn Common Pitch template. So if you think about it, and I think this is what for the Y Prize we'll be using for the final version, but Startup Challenge, all of our engineering entrepreneurship funding opportunities, we're venture initiation program, we're trying to get this pervasive throughout Penn. Again, make sure that you're not treating these as just the topics, but this is a complete pitch deck. And we've sort of drawn this from our own experience, as well as things that have been written in discussions we've had with some of the top VCs that hear pitches all the time. And you'll see they're topics, but you've got to make sure that you're delivering the takeaways for those topics and knitting them together into a comprehensive story. So this is something that we're just beginning to distribute and make available to people. And so we'll make that available as well. And yeah, I'll make sure that Terry, I'll make sure we end a little bit early, because nobody ever minds ending early. And I'll spend the few minutes to zip Terry the slides so that she can distribute it out to the people that attended tonight. So the last thing I'll do is just wish you luck. It's amazing. I've been really fortunate to work with some of the companies that have been involved in this process, and continue to work with some of the ones that either won or didn't win, because sometimes it's not the winners that go on and start the companies based on it. But it's an awesome opportunity to get some really well-established, amazing technology, but you've got to make something out of it from a product and a venture point of view. So Terry, I don't know if you've got any closing things that you want to share with people, but I put my email down here with some trepidation, but since I told you your end slide always had to have contact information, it's my contact information. But as you can imagine, I prioritize my students, my VIP advisees, and the other things that my dean tells me I need to do. Sure, Guillermo, I'm happy to answer questions.
Yeah, so I think one question is, I know that we have both the five pages and the 5-minute video. How would you balance how much content you put into the pages themselves, right? Because I know that 5 pages, there may be a tendency to just condense a lot of information and put it there versus trying to just tell a more compelling story. So how would you think about it?
First of all, I would say that the points that you're going to emphasize in a 5 slide deck and a 5-minute story are pretty much the same points. And believe it or not, you may not be able to get a lot more detail in the 5-minute video than you think you might in the 5-minute pitch. And I think that the question is, in the 5 slides, you want them to be able to stand alone. You don't want people to have to try to figure out, what is the slide telling me? Now, that does not mean, and I don't think anybody anymore likes, for those of you that have worked with consultants, a typical slide in a consulting company's deck usually takes 5 to 10 minutes to read and digest. That is not what you want your 5 slides to look like, right? Your 5 slides are going to be reinforcing the key takeaways, probably aren't going to take more than 10 to 15 seconds to absorb. Maybe if there's a table in there, it takes a little bit more time, a table or a chart, because you've got to just decode, if you will. But I don't think you're actually varying the amount or level of detail in a 5-slide deck and a 5-minute video. I don't know, Terry, do you have a different sense of that? Or do you have an insight of how the judges might use the video versus the deck?
I think my sense of the video is it's just a good opportunity for them to kind of put a face to the team, for them to be able to kind of introduce themselves, to, just articulate in like a more human way their idea and their plan.
Yep.
I think they're looking for something to catch their eye. I think they are looking, as much as we say, you don't have to have, a production crew working on this. Like Dean said, it helps because I think, just to have some quality to it, because I think it makes it stand out a little bit more. But I think, that the pitch deck is just as important. I think what Jeffrey said about, how just be succinct in your message and, get it across. Don't waste time on, thank you questions. Like, don't waste a slide on that. I think you want to cram as much in, but being as succinct as possible in both the video and the slides. But I think in the video, it's more just about, just the human element to it. And, because the successful team is going to be, you're selling yourselves as much as you're selling the product, right? So I think it's just the opportunity for that to get across in a way that slides can't do.
So Cameron, I'll give you just one thought about how when I'm doing these panels and doing these judges, the way that I do it is I'm usually going to be watching / listening to the video while I'm going through the deck. And then sometimes I might go back and refer to the deck after the fact. And so I'd say that the important thing is to make sure that you're just consistent. And it's fine if the order and flow of a production video might be a little bit different than the actual order of the deck. But I think in 5 slides, you should be able to easily find, okay, this is what we're talking about here. And so you want to make sure that there's not big disconnects between the video saying one thing and the slide saying something else, because it's amazing how quickly people can find the disconnects. Other questions? A little bit about the executive summary. So it's interesting because everybody says the same thing. And this is kind of a sign of our times. Nobody writes business plans anymore, unless you take one of my classes. We still make people write business plans. But the whole idea of an executive summary is a 1 to 2, max 3, but usually 1 to 2, usually 1 page summary that really encompasses the entire business. So the same rules apply, right? Make sure that you're hitting the same key points, but in 1 to 2 pages, you are able to put more detail in and take advantage of the benefits of prose, right? Which prose really allows somebody to read. So if you're doing a 1 to 2 page executive summary and all it is collections of bullet lists and charts and tables, you're missing the point, right? So you literally are writing a story in the executive summary. And sure, you might include a picture of the product or a rendering of a prototype. And you might include a table of financial information. But you sure better refer to it in the text and give us some color commentary in the text, right? So rather than just saying our financials are in the table below, say we're going to earn $2.5 million on 12 million revenue by year 5, and then as seen in the table below. Well, now I'm looking at the table and I say, okay, damn well better see 2.5 million net income at the bottom of the table, and the top is going to be a 12 million revenue or whatever it is. Do you see what I mean? So take advantage of the form that prose gives you, which allows you to truly communicate.
What is the prose you were talking about?
Prose is just writing in sentences, right? So just paragraphs and sentences. So sometimes it's kind of interesting. We're so used to doing pitch decks that everybody writes in bullets. Can't tell you the number of times that a bullet may not actually communicate what you think it does. Because what happens is you're putting all the information of what the bullet means, you're thinking about it, but you're just putting one word or one phrase. And so I see that up on a slide and I was like, okay, my favorite one is somebody says, we're going to partner with. Well, what the heck does that mean, right? Does that mean they're a manufacturer and they're a vendor, not really a partner? Or to me, a partnership means we're contributing this, the partner is contributing this, and together we're both going to benefit in these ways. That's a partnership. So you better describe that if that's what it is. Other questions? In 3 minutes. Cool. So I'm going to go send Terry slides and then wish you all the best of luck. And we'll see the final output when we see the final output.
Thank you, Jeffrey.
My pleasure.
Amazing as always.